There are castles that rise proudly above towns and rivers, built to be seen, admired, and remembered. And then there are castles like Hermitage Castle. You do not stumble upon Hermitage by accident. It lies far from busy roads, far from villages, and far from comfort. Hidden deep within a lonely valley where the land folds inward, as if trying to conceal what was placed there. The valley is called Liddesdale, and for centuries it was known by another name, the bloodiest valley in Britain. Hermitage Castle stands alone beside the slow dark ribbon of the Hermitage water, its stone walls rising straight from the earth without ornament or warmth. Even in ruin, it feels severe, unwelcoming, watchful. There is nothing romantic about this place. No elegant towers, no sweeping battlements designed for beauty. Hermitage was built for control, for dominance, for fear. The name itself is older than the stones. It is believed to come from an old French word, Armitage, meaning a guardhouse. Not a home, not a refuge, a post, a place meant to watch and to endure. Here, in this narrow valley, the castle earned another title, one spoken quietly and never with pride. The strength of Liddesdale, because whoever held Hermitage Castle did not simply own land, they ruled violence. Liddesdale was lawless even by medieval standards. Reavers, raiders, and rival families moved through the hills like shadows, stealing cattle, burning homes, settling feuds that never truly ended. Hermitage was planted here to keep order, but instead it absorbed the valley's cruelty, stone by stone. The first castle is thought to have been raised around the year 1240, built by a powerful noble named Nicholas de Soulis, a Norman lord hardened by border warfare. The earliest hermitage followed the familiar pattern of its time, timber and stone arranged for defence rather than comfort. A place where soldiers slept lightly and weapons were never far from hand. But it was the Soulis name, not the walls, that would stain the castle's reputation forever. Nicholas's descendant, William de Soulis, inherited both the castle and the fear that clung to it. William de Soulis was no ordinary lord. Whispers followed him through Liddesdale, stories of cruelty, of disappearances, of rituals conducted far from the eyes of the church. It was said he dabbled in forbidden knowledge, that he sought power not just through steel, but through darker means, that he made bargains better left unspoken. At a time when accusations of witchcraft were as deadly as any blade, William de Soulis was suspected of something far worse: treason. It was believed that he had conspired against Robert the Bruce himself, plotting regicide through sorcery. Whether these accusations were true no longer matters. What matters is what people believed. Legend tells us that the people of Liddesdale, driven beyond endurance by Soulis's rule, finally turned on him. That they seized their lord and dragged him from Hermitage to a nearby ancient stone circle, known as Ninestane Rig. There, according to the tale, he was wrapped in sheets of lead and boiled alive. A punishment as cruel as the man they feared. History, however, tells a quieter ending. William de Soulis was arrested, stripped of his lands, and died as a prisoner in Dumbarton Castle. But legends rarely concern themselves with accuracy, because even now, centuries later, people say that Soulis never truly left Hermitage. They say his spirit walks the ruined halls, that it peers from high windows long after sunset, that something watches from the shadows where stone meets darkness, and that he is not alone. Locals speak of a creature bound to him, a thin known as Redcap Sly, sometimes called Robin Redcap, a grotesque figure from border folklore, described as an ancient hunched man with iron teeth and a cap soaked in blood. A familiar, a servant, a reminder that Hermitage was never merely a castle. It was a place where cruelty settled, and it stayed. Tonight, as the wind moves slowly through broken windows and the fog creeps through the empty hills, Hermitage Castle stands exactly as it always has, silent, waiting, and heavy with memory. Hermitage Castle did not earn its reputation through superstition alone. Long before stories of sorcery and restless spirits took hold, the castle became known for something far more tangible: cruelty practiced in daylight by men whose names were praised rather than feared. In the 14th century, the castle passed into the hands of a man remembered by history as William Douglas, Knight of Liddesdale. He was known as the Flower of Chivalry. It is a title that sounds gentle to modern ears, almost poetic. But in its time, it meant something very different. Douglas earned his name not through kindness. He was ruthless, calculating, and exceptionally effective. A man perfectly suited to the violent borderlands. Under his control, Hermitage Castle became less a fortress and more a statement. It was here that power was enforced without appeal. The castle's walls thickened, its keep grew stronger, and below the stone floors, the dungeon became its true heart. Hermitage's dungeon is unlike most others. It lies deep within the central tower, cut into the earth itself. No windows, no light. Only a narrow opening above, through which prisoners were lowered, and from which many never returned. This was not a place meant to hold men briefly. It was designed to erase them. One man in particular would come to define Hermitage's infamy. His name was Alexander Ramsay of Dalhousie. Ramsay was a rival to Douglas, not on the battlefield, but at court. He had earned royal favour, something Douglas could not tolerate. So Ramsay was invited to Hermitage under the pretence of diplomacy. He never left. Douglas had him seized and thrown into the dungeon, where he was deliberately starved to death. No execution, no trial, just silence and time. It is said that Ramsay scratched at the stone in his final days, his fingers raw, his voice gone, that the walls themselves remember the sound. Even now, visitors speak of the dungeon with a particular unease. The air feels heavier there. Sound behaves strangely, refusing to echo properly. Some report a sudden tightness in the chest, others an overwhelming urge to leave, as if the space itself rejects company. Douglas did not meet a peaceful end. After years of violence, he was murdered, betrayed by his own kin. His body was discovered far from the castle. His authority ended as abruptly as it had been exercised. Hermitage passed again into new hands. But the pattern remained. Control, imprisonment, death. During the turbulent years that followed, the castle shifted between Scottish and English possession. The border moved. Alliances changed. But Hermitage remained constant, grim, functional, and unforgiving. When the powerful Douglas family, known later as the Black Douglases, took firm control, the castle was expanded into the shape we recognise today. Stone replaced timber. Strength replaced subtlety. Hermitage was no longer merely a guardhouse. It was a warning. Yet, even as its walls grew stronger, the castle's soul darkened. Violence had become routine here, and places shaped by such habits do not forget them easily. Local folklore claims that the dungeon is never truly empty, that voices sometimes rise from it late at night, not words, but breath, laboured and close. Some say the spirit of Alexander Ramsay still lingers below, trapped in the last moments of his life. Others believe the dungeon holds more than one presence, echoes layered over centuries. By the time dawn breaks over Liddesdale, the castle's shadow stretches long across the valley floor. It touches the river, it touches the hills, the land that once bled for it. And in that shadow, the past does not sleep. It waits. By the middle of the 16th century, Hermitage Castle had seen enough blood to last several lifetimes. And yet, it was still waiting. Waiting for the moment that would bind its name not just to cruelty and power, but to obsession, scandal, and tragedy at the very heart of Scotland's crown. The year was 1566. Scotland was restless. Nobles plotted openly. Religion divided families. And the throne itself felt uncertain beneath the feet of its queen. That queen was Mary, Queen of Scots. Mary was young, intelligent, and surrounded by enemies who smiled easily. Her marriage to Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley, had collapsed into bitterness and distrust. Court life was a web of rumours and betrayals, each more dangerous than the last. And far from Edinburgh, deep in the lawless border country, one man held a grip on power that rivalled any lord at court. His name was James Hepburn, Earl of Bothwell. Bothwell was keeper of Hermitage Castle. He was everything the borders valued: violent, fearless, and decisive. A man who could command loyalty through force alone. And he was dangerously close to the Queen. In October of that year, violence reached him as well. Bothwell had captured a notorious border reiver, John Eliot of the Park, and brought him to Hermitage. Eliot attempted to escape. Bothwell shot him with a pistol, but Eliot did not fall quietly. Wounded and desperate, he turned and struck back, swinging a heavy two-handed sword. The blow injured Bothwell badly, leaving him fevered, bleeding and close to death within the cold walls of the castle. Word of this travelled quickly. When it reached Mary, she did something extraordinary. Against advice, against safety, and against reason, she rode to Hermitage Castle. The journey from Jedburgh to the castle was long and dangerous, across rough ground, through territory known for ambush and lawlessness. Mary made the ride at speed, covering the distance in little more than a day. She was barely recovered from childbirth. Her body was weak, her political position fragile, and yet she rode on. Those who accompanied her later spoke of exhaustion and fear, of the Queen pressing forward despite warnings, driven by something stronger than caution. Love, some said. Obsession, others whispered. When Mary arrived at Hermitage, she found Bothwell alive, but gravely ill. She stayed only briefly, too briefly for the journey to make sense, and then she rode back. Within days, she collapsed, dangerously sick, her life hanging in the balance. From that moment on, rumours hardened into belief. Whatever bound Mary to Bothwell, it was no longer discreet. Hermitage Castle had become the silent witness to it. Within a year, the situation exploded. Mary's husband, Lord Darnley, was murdered under mysterious circumstances. Bothwell was widely suspected of involvement. Despite this, or perhaps because of the chaos surrounding it, Mary married Bothwell shortly afterward. The marriage shocked Scotland. Nobles rebelled. Public trust evaporated. At Cadbury Hill, Mary was confronted by her enemies and forced to surrender. She would soon abdicate the throne. Bothwell fled. His escape took him far from Hermitage, far from Scotland, to Norway, and eventually to Denmark. There he was arrested, imprisoned, and forgotten by those he had once commanded. He died alone, insane, in appalling conditions. His body would later be preserved, a grim relic of ambition undone. Hermitage Castle did not follow him into exile. It stayed. And those who remained in Liddesdale said the castle changed after that year, as if something had been torn open within its walls. Visitors spoke of sudden waves of emotion, grief, panic, longing, with no clear cause. Others claimed to hear the sound of hooves at night, distant and fleeting, as though a rider were passing through the valley long after the roads had emptied. Some believe Mary herself never truly left the castle behind, that part of her remained here, bound to the moment she chose passion over caution and paid for it with her crown. They say that on certain nights, when storms roll through Liddesdale and rain lashes the stone, a woman's figure can be seen standing near the upper windows, watching the valley, waiting, not for a lover, but for a past that cannot be undone. Hermitage Castle has seen many rulers, but it remembers this one best. By the time the echoes of Mary's fall had faded from the borders, Hermitage Castle was already changing hands once more. It always did. Power in Liddesdale was never permanent. It was borrowed, seized, forfeited, and almost always lost through blood or betrayal. The castle passed from the great houses of Scotland into the grip of men who understood the borders for what they were, a place where law bent easily and fear was the most reliable authority. After the chaos surrounding Bothwell, Hermitage returned briefly to the crown, but the crown, distant and distracted, could not hold it for long. Soon the castle was granted to one of the most notorious figures the borders would ever produce, Walter Scott of Buccleuch. They called him Bold Buccleuch, and the name was earned. Walter Scott was not a courtly lord. He was a border reaver, a man shaped by cattle raids, night rides, and violent reprisal. He understood Hermitage instinctively. Under Scots control, the castle returned to its original purpose: enforcement. From Hermitage, Buccleuch ruled Liddesdale with a firm hand, acting as warden of the marches, judge, jury, and executioner when it suited him. Justice here was swift and often personal. It was during this later period that Hermitage's reputation for darkness deepened beyond history and into legend. The 16th century was drawing to a close, and Scotland was once again gripped by fear, not of invasion or rebellion, but of the unseen. Witch trials returned with renewed intensity. Across the country, accusations spread rapidly, fueled by religious extremism and political paranoia. The devil, it was said, walked openly in Scotland, and witches walked beside him. Hermitage Castle, already burdened by centuries of violence, became associated with these fears. Though not a formal court for witch trials, the castle was said to have held accused men and women during interrogations, especially those suspected of conspiring against the crown. One name in particular haunted its walls: Francis Stuart, Earl of Bothwell, nephew of the earlier Bothwell, inherited not only a title, but a reputation. He was intelligent, ambitious and dangerously unpredictable. Some saw him as a potential rival to James VI of Scotland himself. Others whispered something darker. Francis Stuart was repeatedly accused of involvement with witchcraft, including links to the infamous North Berwick witch trials, where it was claimed witches had plotted to kill the king using storms and sorcery. Whether these accusations were true mattered less than the danger they represented. In a Scotland obsessed with rooting out evil, suspicion alone was enough to destroy a man. Francis Stuart was arrested, imprisoned, pardoned, and then accused again. His life became a cycle of intrigue and escape, loyalty and betrayal. Eventually, he was declared a traitor. His lands, including Hermitage, were forfeited once more. The castle returned to royal control, but by now, something fundamental had shifted. Hermitage no longer mattered strategically the way it once had. In 1603, the Union of Crowns joined Scotland and England under one monarch. The borders, once a violent frontier, became quieter almost overnight. Armies withdrew, and castles like Hermitage lost their purpose. Without conflict, its walls stood empty. Stone began to crack. Roofs collapsed. Rooms that had once echoed with orders and screams fell silent. By the 18th century, Hermitage Castle was already a ruin. Yet visitors who approached it noticed something strange. Despite abandonment, the place did not feel empty. People spoke of an oppressive atmosphere, a heaviness that pressed down even on bright days, of sudden cold in sheltered corners, of the unsettling feeling that the castle was aware of them. Hermitage Castle had never been a home. It was a mechanism, built to control a valley through fear, and mechanisms do not forget their purpose easily. Even now, standing among its ruins, you may notice how sound fades unnaturally fast, how the walls seem to lean inward, how the valley beyond feels distant and disconnected, as if the castle still exists slightly apart from the rest of the world around it, a place where the past remains closer than it should, and where the night, once it settles, feels unusually complete. When the violence finally ebbed from the borderlands, it did so without ceremony. There was no final battle at Hermitage Castle, no triumphant return, no last command shouted from the walls. The castle was simply left behind. After the Union of Crowns in 1603, the border between Scotland and England lost its purpose as a place of constant war. Reivers disappeared into history, and wardens laid down authority. And Hermitage, which had existed only to enforce control, found itself without a reason to continue. Stone by stone, it began to fall. The roofs collapsed inward, and the wood rotted. Rain found its way into every crack and seam. Rooms that once held lords, soldiers and prisoners became open to the sky. The dungeon, sealed for centuries, filled with water and darkness. Yet, even in ruin, the castle did not soften. Visitors in the 18th and 19th centuries wrote of its atmosphere with unusual consistency. They did not describe beauty, they described oppression. Hermitage was called one of the most sinister castles in Scotland, not because of what it looked like, but because of how it felt. There are ruins that invite imagination, places where ivy and birdsong reclaim what humans abandoned. Hermitage never allowed that. The walls stand stark and bare, refusing decoration. No romantic arches, no comforting curves, just stone. The valley around it remains quiet, even now. Liddesdale feels deliberately distant from the rest of the world, as though roads approach it reluctantly. And when fog settles into the low ground, the castle seems to rise from it rather than sit within it, as if it belongs more to the mist than to the land. In the 19th century, attempts were made to stabilise the ruin. Workmen arrived with tools and plans. Some refused to stay long. Accounts from the time speak of men seeing figures in the upper floors, places that could not be reached by stair or ladder. A solitary shape, standing motionless, watching from a window that no longer had a floor beneath it. Others reported sounds from the heart of the castle late in the day, footsteps where there should have been none, the clink of metal, the low murmur of voices just out of reach. What unsettled them most was not fear, but certainty. The certainty that they were not alone. In time, Hermitage Castle came under the protection of the state, preserved not as a residence, but as a warning, a monument to a brutal past. Today it is cared for by Historic Environment Scotland, standing open to visitors during the warmer months. People come expecting history. Many leave with something else. They speak of sudden changes in mood, of a heaviness that settles without warning, of a feeling that the castle does not like to be observed. Some describe cold spots that linger in specific rooms, regardless of weather. Others feel pressure, as if the air itself has weight. There are those who believe Hermitage is haunted by individuals. By William de Soulis, whose cruelty sealed the castle's earliest legends. By Alexander Ramsay, starved in the darkness. Or by Mary, Queen of Scots, whose brief visit altered the course of a kingdom. But others believe something different. That Hermitage is not haunted by people at all. It has become the sum of what happened there, a structure saturated by fear, ambition, suffering, and silence. Places like this do not need ghosts. They are the ghost. As evening falls over Liddesdale, the castle's shadow stretches once more across the valley floor. The hills hold their distance, and Hermitage waits. Not for visitors, not for belief, but for quiet. Because in the absence of sound, of movement, of distraction, the past is the closest. And if you stand there long enough, truly still, you may feel it. A presence not beside you, but around you. In the walls, in the ground, in the air itself. Hermitage Castle no longer rules a valley, but it has never stopped remembering it, and some memories, once carved into stone, never fade.